Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started here. Welcome, good morning, everybody. We're doing these a little earlier in the morning than usual, in our usual 2 p.m. time slot. So thanks for joining us early. Popular topic, right? Popular topic: Windows 7 end of life. Don't put your business at risk. I know this is something that is definitely on the top of our minds. I think it's on the top of many folks' minds as well. So, in concert with some of the other educational series that we've been doing as of late, we wanted to bring this topic up, talk about what are some potential security risks of not moving. What are some options that you have at your disposal in order to deal with this. So we'll be going through that today. I asked John Emmett to join me again to discuss this topic. A little bit of housekeeping first. We will be sending out a recording of this. So if you had somebody that couldn't join us today, a colleague or a colleague across the country, please feel free to send this to them. When you do get the link, we're happy to share that and happy to have you share that around as well. Additionally, if you do have questions throughout the event, please don't hesitate and please use the Q&A box. It should be on the lower right-hand side. That's where you would find it. Just type your question in there, and then John and I will try to get to those questions at the end of the presentation. I think that pretty much covers the housekeeping portion. John, are you ready to get going?
Yeah, Chris, great to be here. Thanks, and looking forward to talking about Windows end of life.
Great. So, guys, we have the agenda teed up. As I was saying, we're looking to take you guys through today. Talk about things like what are those risks if you don't migrate, right? So we're on a very condensed timeline at this point, which John will talk about here in a second. But we need to probably start moving, right? The urgency is there. The other thing that we wanted to talk about is around some of the enhancements around Windows 10 and Windows Server 2019. What are those enhancements? How are they going to benefit you? And then, like I said, to open up, what options do we have, right, as IT professionals? There's what I would call a decision tree there for us to make, and depending upon your situation or your organization's situation, may help guide those decisions, and we'll talk about what some of those are as well. The other thing is, obviously, there's a few more considerations that we'll touch on as you're starting to think about, making those decisions of to switch or not switch or update, and we'll talk through those as well. So I think let's go ahead and get into, start discussing what some of those security risks are, and what some of the vulnerabilities that we see as a result of not switching.
Yeah, so as we said, it's all about Windows 7 end of life. Windows Server 2008 and 2008 R2 are also end of life, end of support, and that's happening in January of 2020. So January 14th of next year, end of support. And what that means is that you won't get security updates, you won't get bug fixes, and you won't get technical support. And so the asterisk there on no security updates is, well, you do have the option to pay for what Microsoft calls their extended security update program. And that program is pay on a per device basis. So it really depends on how many computers you want to cover and keep on Windows 7 or Windows Server 2008 under that program. But if you're, for example, running Windows 7 Enterprise, the cost starts at $25 in the first year, and then it doubles each year after that over the 3-year term of that ESU program. So it starts at 25, goes to 50, and then goes to $100 in the third year. So the price is going to jump up there pretty quickly. And then on top of that, if you're running Windows 7 Professional, the price starts out double. So it starts out at $50 per device in the first year and then doubles the same way in the next 2 years. So the program runs for 3 years, up to 2023, and gives you a little bit of leeway to to work on your migration plans if you need that extra time. But the important thing to remember is that even with the ESU program, you're not going to get support. You're just going to get patches for the critical vulnerabilities, and we'll talk more about that in a minute.
Yeah. So to me, it's we knew this was coming, right? And we are approaching or rapidly approaching the fourth quarter or the end of the year. Before this needs to occur. So I think I guess it's kind of time, John, to kind of raise that flag and say we got to get moving if we haven't already started down this path to figure this out.
Yeah, exactly. Time is getting to be of the essence if you haven't started planning for this transition already.
Right, and I'm sure depending upon the size of the organization as well, right? It could be a very quick turnaround for some, but some a little bit more lengthy. Especially dealing with if you have regional offices or offices across country or even globally, that could be impacted. So it could, depending upon your situation, could take more time or less time, but I think at this point we've got to kind of raise the flag. So this is to me it's kind of an interesting slide when you had shared the slides with me. When I'm looking at this, where there's almost like 500 Windows desktop vulnerabilities last year. That's pretty startling, and 169 of those are actually critical. So, the odds, they seem high that more vulnerabilities will be disclosed after the end of life date. So, this means that essentially, we're going to have to deal with this. That's what this slide says to me. It is starting to deal with, and it's only going to probably get worse after the end of life happens in January. So, we need to be thinking about migrating now.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if you think back to the famous or infamous WannaCry ransomware attack that happened back in 2017, it impacted more than something like 200,000 computers globally that were affected by that ransomware attack. And the reason why that happened is that none of those machines were patched with the patch that was released by Microsoft more than 2 months before that attack occurred. So the vulnerability was known, the patch was available a couple of months before that attack occurred, and more than 200,000 machines were not patched, and therefore they were affected by that attack. And if something like that were to happen after January of this coming year, and it affected Windows 7 or Windows Server 2008, then you can see that you're in trouble unless you either have extended security updates coming and you apply those patches, or you've migrated, right? So time, again, is of the essence. You need to apply those patches in a timely manner. So even if you stay on Windows 7 and you're getting ESU updates, you need to apply them in a timely manner. And that means typically most organizations are trying to apply their patches within 30 days of availability. And many are doing it even in 15 days. So no excuse for, getting hit by an attack that happens 2 or 3 months later. And when we look at the cost of a security breach, so there's lots of data out there. Some of this data comes from the Ponemon Institute 2019 cost of data breach report. And so you can see that the average cost of a security breach globally is almost $4 million. And that's a pretty startling number all by itself. But then when you look at that, how that impacts mid-sized businesses relative to large enterprises, you can really see that the mid-sized business really suffers more greatly. In this case, they showed data for companies from 500 to 1,000 employee size organizations, and the average cost per employee is more than $3,500. Whereas if you look at the large enterprises with more than 25,000 people, the cost is down to around $200 per employee. So you can see a much bigger impact to you if you're a mid-sized business, and you can see why a large percentage of small and mid-sized businesses can actually go out of business if they suffer a security breach like this. And I guess the last point I would make here is that a lot of small and medium-sized businesses assume that they're not a target, right? You know, not why would they bother with me kind of thing. And the fact of the matter is that they are a target. And the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report from 2019 showed that, in fact, 43% of breaches last year affected small organizations.
Right, and why is that? Because, John, is that because of because they're not doing things like this? Is it just an easier kind of low-hanging fruit target? Is that ultimately the rationale there? Why these folks are doing it?
Yeah, I think there's a number of factors there. I think one factor is that the small, medium-sized businesses may not be as well protected or in as secure position as the large enterprises in some cases. You know, you don't have the security expertise on staff. You don't have the budget for training and tools and so forth. So you are, in some sense, maybe an easier target for cyber attacks. And the other factor is that in many cases, or in some cases at least, the cyber attackers are going after you as kind of the entry point into a larger organization. So it's kind of the stepping stone into the large organization through a small business.
Right. Sure. Yeah. I've heard of situations where, you know, kind of the cookie crumb trail, so to speak, where SMB, got hacked essentially, and then they went into the accounts payable portion and then started leveraging that and doing phishing through the accounts payable, and then they got access to to all of those vendors and so on. So yeah, it just continues to scale. And I know it's just not SMBs that I know are being threatened, by this as well. I think we have to also talk about universities, public school systems. I think public government. We've had several situations here, even within the last, probably several months around government as well. So I think that my takeaway is that everybody just continue to be vigilant, right? So with the so I guess let's kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about what some of the advantages are. I kind of have a sneaky suspicion it's a big one is obviously security, right? But why, I guess the burning question is, and I think I kind of started to ask it, but why haven't folks gone ahead and moved? Why are we up against what's seeming like a deadline, rapidly approaching deadline, and we haven't seen this big shift just overall of folks moving to 10?
Yeah, exactly. I think, in the past, we saw with the transition from Windows XP to Windows 7 that many organizations really delayed that for a really long time. I think the transition is happening faster in this go around, but you do still see that there are a lot of companies that haven't made the transition yet.
Right, and I think one of those is, I do hear this a lot is, we hate Windows 10. So, I think, whether we like it or not, I think the reality of the benefits ultimately and the benefits of protecting the business or protecting the government or protecting the institution, far outweighs, far outweighs the risk potential there. And I think, I think the term risk adverse, right, starts to come to mind.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And as shown on the slide, there are steps that you can take. May seem somewhat minor, but there are steps that you can take to make your Windows 10 experience look more like Windows 7 if you really do like the Windows 7 experience. So there are things that you could do with things like Classic Shell to make your Windows 7-like start menu appear, and removing things like the Cortana box and so forth, so that you can configure Windows 10 to be more Windows 7-like if that's your preference. One of the other big issues and concerns, of course, is that you have legacy applications, and this could be a really big issue for some organizations where you have a legacy application, it's critical to your business, and you don't think it's going to be able to run in the Windows 10 or Windows Server 2012, 2016, 2019 environment. So the first thing that you need to be doing as part of your migration plan is to test application compatibility with the new operating system versions, whether that be on the Windows desktop with Windows 10 or on the server, and see whether you're running into problems with that. And you can use tools like the one shown here. Microsoft has a tool called Upgrade Readiness that can actually help you plan and manage your full upgrade project from end to end. In true Microsoft fashion, it works by establishing a connection between your computers and Microsoft. So they're going to collect a lot of computer application and driver data for analysis. And then they're going to use that data to identify if there are any compatibility issues that might impede your progress to moving to Windows 10. So that's one possibility. There are other tools that, of course, you could use and see whether you're running into any of those compatibility issues.
Right. I think with legacy-based, web-based applications, I think it is an area as well. We probably need to think about configuring, the system to run, Internet Explorer 11, right, to maintain that compatibility. I think that's another area.
Too. Yeah, the web-based apps, browser-based applications, that's another issue is, with the move, kind of away from Internet Explorer and to Edge and other browsers that, you need to check those kinds of applications to see whether you're going to have any compatibility issues there as well.
Yep.
So as Chris mentioned earlier, one of the big things with Windows 10 is enhanced security. It has multiple layers of security that are built right into the operating system. So you get things like advanced biometrics, which of course are hardware dependent. So something like a fingerprint scanner, so that you can use your fingerprint to log into your machine instead of typing in a PIN or a password. So there's advances with biometrics. You have advanced threat protection and malware protection built into Windows 10. So Microsoft claims and touts that Windows 10 is their most secure desktop operating system that they have ever released. And they've certainly put a lot of emphasis and focus around the security aspect of things. So that's obviously one of the key reasons why you would want to get on Windows 10 and move off of Windows 7 to have enhanced security. But there are a few other benefits as well. So Chris, maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I know, and I, have experienced this as well. I'm sure we've all experienced it, just with the, a Windows machine just kind of taking forever, on startup. So, annoying to the user, so, this kind of, I think, again, the benefit is a faster startup, right? That's one of the things that we are seeing with the 10 application or 10 OS. So, I think, Microsoft, they've taken a lot of their input in, they're focused on very much delivering, a seamless experience across mobile and desktop devices, et cetera. So it's pretty, I kind of look at it as almost kind of expected these days, right? So, and I think, there's definitely an advantage, or we'll talk about Hyper-V as well in a second, in relationship to Windows 10. But, I see those as kind of two significant or other benefits, just from a kind of user standpoint where, okay, I'm going to have faster startup in the morning when I come in, I've got my coffee, I'm trying to get my day started. And then just, again, when we're on the go, right, and having that nice seamless experience, across mobile, moving from desktop to mobile as I'm on the go.
Yep,
So.
yep, exactly. And we'll talk a little bit more about cloud Azure support across Windows 10 and particularly with Windows Server 2019 here in a few minutes. So that's another aspect of things that that you can also consider when you're making this migration. So as we said, the big thing with Windows 10 was security. Big thing with Windows Server 2019 is also security. Again, there's lots of multiple layers of security that are built into the operating system to enhance your security posture in your data center server environment. It also affords more simplified server management using a new tool called Windows Admin Center. So with that tool, you can manage your on-premise server devices as well as your virtual machines. And then as you start to, or if you've already started, of course, making the migration to the cloud with Azure, you can also manage your Azure cloud virtual machines. So with this Windows Admin Center, you can have that hybrid environment and manage devices and virtual machines across the full hybrid environment. And you might also be running what's known as Windows Server Core, which is the version of the server operating system that doesn't have a GUI. And not having the GUI helps you to reduce what's known as the attack surface. So fewer vulnerabilities to worry about in your environment with the smaller footprint that you get with the core. And so that helps with your security posture as well. It takes up less disk space. And again, you would use Windows Admin Center, or possibly if you're a PowerShell guru, you might use Remote PowerShell to manage your servers and VMs on that Windows Server Core OS. And again, mentioned ties to Microsoft Azure. So with Windows Server 2019, it really does help you bridge from your on-premise environment to the cloud, in this case, the Azure cloud, and have that hybrid IT infrastructure. And of course, Azure, the Azure cloud runs on Windows Server. And you can integrate and or migrate a very heterogeneous environment to Azure. So that could include not only the Microsoft Hyper-V virtual environment, but also VMware virtual machines. It could incorporate both Windows OS as well as Linux. So Linux platform support is a key thing here, as well as different database infrastructure like Oracle and SQL Server can both be integrated and migrated across to Azure.
So I guess the big question here, John, is this reminds me of a song, right? Should I stay or should I go, right? So I think that's that's a big question. I definitely get from customers get asked that question. So kind of talk a little bit about some of the options. If you do stay on 7.
Sure. So like we've mentioned earlier, you do have the option of staying on Windows 7 or Windows Server 2008 if you really have to, like in the case, you do have one or more legacy applications that, have that compatibility issue with the new operating system. So you really need to keep at least a subset of your machines running on the old operating system. And so to do that, you can pay for ESU, the Extended Security Update Program. And again, depending on how many, how large your organization is, how many devices you're talking about, or how many you need to keep on the older OS, that could impact your decision here in terms of cost, right? So again, looking at it from a cost per device standpoint, you need to weigh that and see how many machines do I really need to keep on Windows 7 or Windows Server 2008. That's one option. The second option there is that you could actually migrate your desktop environment to Windows virtual desktops. Again, could be running in Azure. And if you do that, run in the Windows virtual desktop environment, you get the 3 years of extended security updates for free, essentially. So you're paying for the virtual desktop environment, but as part of that, you get the ESU program included. And similarly, on the server side, you can take your server workloads from Windows Server 2008 and migrate them to Azure Virtual Machines, and again, get that 3 years of ESU included in that program. So you have a number of different options there in terms of what you do in the short term. Again, ESU only lasts for 3 years, so you buy yourself a little bit more time, but ultimately you're going to have to migrate your systems.
So I guess hardware is also another option. I guess there's two options for that, but I kind of alluded to this a little bit at the beginning. Is what I see as kind of a fork in the road, right? A decision tree when we're talking about this. So I'm sure, like most most companies out there, you've probably got assets that are probably fit in both of these categories. So what's the approach there? How do you start to determine and think about okay, if I go and upgrade, get new hardware, well, then it's already done for me, right? It's there. That's based on if it's probably older than 3 years, right? So, but like I said, we're probably most places are probably in two camps, right? The other is that if you are keeping your hardware, then generally, right, if it's less than 3 years, then it should meet those requirements for you to go ahead and upgrade to 10. So that shouldn't really be much of an issue, but I again, we're coming up very rapidly, towards the date in January, and if we're talking about full replacements in some cases, or departments or whatever, keeping track of that inventory and where we're at with the age of that inventory, it could be full switch out or partial, so we got to start to understand that, prioritize those things, prioritize that inventory of making the switch.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're going to talk about this in a couple of minutes, but having an endpoint management solution like a Kaseya VSA is going to provide you that inventory data, so you know what you have out there, what the age of your hardware is, what versions of operating systems you're running in your environment. So having that kind of inventory in place is obviously critical here.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about what you need to do to have a successful migration. First up, like we've mentioned a few times now, is start today. So if you haven't started your planning process and started your migration process yet, then now's the time to start. And next thing you probably want to do is create what we're calling a phased migration plan. We'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. But you really want to plan this out, and as part of that phased migration plan, as we'll see, you want to validate the process. So before you roll this out to your full environment, you probably want to do some pilot testing of the process, the upgrade process, as Chris was just talking about. If you are keeping some hardware and migrating the OS, you want to test out that process before you roll it out to a large number of devices. Make sure it's all working. And when possible, you want to do what Microsoft calls an in-place upgrade from Windows 7 to Windows 10. And the reason for that, or one of the key reasons for that, is that you want to do the in-place upgrade because it's automatically going to save and restore your user and application data. And if you don't have that automatic process happening with the in-place upgrade, then you're going to have to take care of that yourself. You'll have to have your own solution for saving and restoring user and app data. So typically you can do an in-place upgrade. The only one example of a case where it wouldn't work is, let's say you're moving from a 32-bit Windows 7 machine to a 64-bit Windows 10 machine, then you would not be able to do the in-place upgrade. So as I mentioned, one of the key things here is to plan out a phased migration. And the first step in that process is that you want to, as Chris mentioned a couple minutes ago, collect the inventory of all the machines in your environment. Use a tool like VSA to collect that inventory as a regular part of your IT process, perhaps, and then assess dependencies and application compatibility issues. So again, here's where you would bring in the tools to test compatibility with the new versions of the operating system, see whether you do have any issues with that, and figure out what your options are there, as we've talked about previously. In phase 2, you're going to start the migration plan and remediation steps. And one of the key things here is making sure that you have good backups in place. So of course, as a Unitrends customer, you're probably in pretty good shape there. You probably have a good backup process in place and have good backups on hand as a regular matter of course. Then in phase 3, this might be where you start to do the pilot testing phase, testing that upgrade migration process, perhaps, the machines that you're migrating from Windows 7 to Windows 10, for example. And one key thing to do here is make sure that you are testing this across different groups within the organization. Maybe a few people from the finance department, or a few people from the sales department, and a few others from marketing and so forth. So you're piloting across different groups within the organization to make sure that you can handle all the different configurations of these machines. Next, in phases 4 and 5 is when you're really going to start to roll it out to the entire organization and then remediate any issues that you might find along the way. And another thing to keep in mind is that now is a good time to consider your Active Directory, your domain controllers, your DNS servers, and see if you need to do any cleanup on those systems or structures and restructure those if need be. And this is a good time to do all that as part of this overall migration process.
So when we're looking at something like this, John, what about licensing, right? That certainly can be kind of be a hot topic. So what kind of options do you have out there, when it comes to licensing?
Sure. Yeah. Well, as we all know, Microsoft licensing tends to be fairly complex, and it hasn't really changed in that regard.
Right.
So there are lots of options, and it really kind of depends on what best meets your organization's needs. If you are on, for example, Windows 7 Pro is your default operating system in your current environment, then you probably want to use the Windows 10 Pro upgrade license to move from Windows 7 Pro to Windows 10, for example. So that's the recommendation for Windows 7 Pro users. If you're talking enterprise, then you have E3 and E5, and you have both device-based and user-based licensing for both of those. And then there's things like the Microsoft 365 bundle, not to be confused with Office 365. So the MS 365 bundle includes a license to Windows 10 Enterprise or Business. It also includes the license for Office 365 and then something that's called the Enterprise Mobility Plus Security Suite. So there's a lot in the Microsoft 365 bundle that could be a good option for some organizations. And then in terms of the server licensing, it really comes down to which operating system version is right for you. You could go to 2012, 2012 R2, 2016 R2, or even to the latest version, which is 2019. And of course, going from 2016 to 2019, there really was no R2. So there's been a change in how Microsoft does their updates, right? So we're going to talk about that next. So in this case, there are a couple of different things here in terms of their update model. One is the Windows as a Service. And one of the important things to realize with Windows as a service is it's not really a true as a service cloud delivery model. It's more of Microsoft's term for how they are going to do updates to Windows operating systems. And this has come into effect with Windows 10 and Windows Server 2016 plus. So going forward from Windows Server 2016. And the way it works is you get to choose the frequency of update that you want based on the servicing channel that you pick. So there are two different servicing channels. The first one is called semi-annual channel, or SAC, and with that you get 2 times per year major feature releases. So approximately every 6 months you're getting a feature update, and then you're also getting the monthly patches. So this is the thing that you would pick if you really need to have those latest and greatest features of Windows operating system on that more frequent basis. The long-term servicing channel, or LTSC, is the other option, and it's more of what you're used to, previously, meaning, more of the old tempo of getting updates, every year or two, and it's kind of the more traditional model. And it's something that you would use if you don't need those frequent updates, you don't need the latest and the greatest features, but you want more stability, right? So you need stability. It might apply to, in some cases, specialized devices like ATM machines or medical devices might fall into this category where you really want the long-term stability. You don't need the high frequency of updates. So you might go with the LTSC channel in that case. And the other thing to note is that with the release cadence that they have, for example, looking at the graphic on the right here with Windows 10, the releases have a production support phase that lasts for 18 months. And they're overlapping. So they're staggered releases, and so you have this overlapping period of production support. So that's important to see that you don't have any gaps there as you move from one version to the next, one update to the next. You're always covered under this production support. And we wanted to talk, at least briefly, about another consideration as you're doing your migration from Windows 7 or Windows Server 2008, and that is Hyper-V. So Microsoft Hyper-V is their virtualization technology. It's been around for a long time, and essentially you can, so to speak, have it your way, right? So there's 3 different flavors of Hyper-V. You can get it with Windows Server. You can get what they call the headless Hyper-V server and use what we spoke about earlier, the Windows Admin Center or Remote PowerShell to manage your VMs for that headless Hyper-V server. And you can even run Hyper-V on Windows 10. So as you migrate your desktops to Windows 10, you have this capability to have a virtual environment running on that system. The other thing to keep in mind is that the Hyper-V is really the way to manage not only your on-prem virtual machines, but it's kind of that stepping stone to Azure and having virtual machines running in the cloud. You could even have a Windows 10 machine or Windows Server machine on-prem and create a virtual machine that runs Windows 7 or Windows Server 2008. And this could be a good way for you to test out your migration process. So you would spin up a virtual machine in Hyper-V and set that up for Windows 7 or Windows Server 2008 and be able to use that to test out different parts of your migration process. Lastly, the Hyper-V is not just for Windows. I think I mentioned earlier that you could have full support for Linux distributions in Hyper-V. And Microsoft, in fact, has become one of the biggest code contributors to the Linux open source environment. And lastly, you also get Hyper-V at no cost. So when you're using Windows Server or Windows 10 desktop, you get Hyper-V at no cost. So there's a lot of flexibility here. There's a lot of things that you can do to leverage Hyper-V to create a test environment, to test out your migration process, and then bridge that gap from on-prem to the Azure cloud going forward.
Hey, John. Hey, do we have time for a quick question that came in?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So the question was, and I think it was back in relationship to maybe a couple of slides ago, but the question is, the current equipment that they're using on Windows 7, does it have to be compatible with the upgrade requirements as well, such as being upgraded needing to have at least 8 gigabytes or RAM?
So if I understood the question correctly, if you're migrating an existing machine, does it have to meet those Windows 10 requirements? Is that the question?
Well, I'll read this specific question. I may have missed this, but this didn't. But doesn't the equipment using Windows 7 have to be compatible with the upgrade requirements as well, such as the computer being upgraded needing to have at least 8 gigabytes or RAM?
Yes, sure. Yeah, you would need to, test or check your hardware that meets the requirements for Windows 10. But typically, the hardware requirements for Windows 10 from a desktop perspective are essentially the same as the requirements for Windows 7, so there shouldn't be too much of an issue there. It would be sort of the exception, not the rule, that there would be a machine that wouldn't run Windows 10 if it's already running Windows 7.
There was a follow-up to that. The question, which I think you just kind of answered. This has become a problem for me because many of the workstations that they have don't have more than 4 gigabytes of memory. So the question was, should they look at replacing machines or buy more RAM? Would the upgrade still work?
Sure. Yeah, I think it does have that 8 gigabyte memory requirement. So yeah, you might either bump up the memory or of course buy new hardware.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks, John.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. Good to have some questions coming in. So we just wanted to touch briefly on tools. So before I jump into VSA, I was just going to mention that, of course, like we've seen earlier, Microsoft provides a number of free tools, including a tool known as Windows Migration Assistant. They have Windows 2008 Upgrade Advisor, and then they have another tool called MAP, which stands for the Microsoft Assessment and Planning Tool. So there's a bunch of tools that they're providing that can be useful in your migration process here. And as we mentioned earlier, another tool that you could use is something like Kaseya VSA, which is an endpoint management and remote monitoring tool. It would help you to understand what's out there in your environment, what hardware you have, how old that hardware is, what the hardware configuration is. So does it meet your Windows 10 hardware requirements like we were just talking about? So you can collect all that information as part of the standard inventory collection process that a tool like VSA would support. And all that information, of course, is really critical to your migration planning. It's a leading endpoint management and network monitoring solution for mid-sized businesses, and it's also a leading RMM solution for managed service providers, or MSPs. Another thing that you can do with VSA is on an ongoing basis, post-migration, let's say, keep all of your systems up to date with automated software deployment and automated patch management processes. And that means that, again, you're going to be less susceptible to cyber attacks and security breaches because you are keeping your systems up to date with patching. So having an automated patch management process in place is really critical, as we talked about earlier, and you can do patches across Windows operating system, Mac, and even third-party applications. And lastly, I would mention the IT automation and auto remediation of IT incidents, which can help you as an IT team and all your IT technicians to get a lot more done with less effort. So the more automation you can implement, the better, and the more streamlined your IT processes will be. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Chris, to talk about next steps and how you can learn more.
Yeah, will do. I think the one thing that I'll add to just kind of your last comment there with respect to VSA, where there are customers that are currently doing this and going through this migration. There's actually something that was not there, but you would have access to is the automation exchange. So we have customers as well as folks within the company that write scripts in order to help that migration and update those endpoints to get them on the right OS, and in this case, Windows 10. So that is something to think about as well as just being able to deploy that script inside the VSA, and then tag the machines that you want to run that script and automate that whole upgrade process. So we tried to help customers through this transition. A lot of this content that John went over today, we talked about. We do have an ebook around this, so it's got some of that a lot of the information that we talked about today in this ebook. So if you haven't seen it, there's the URL. I encourage you to go download it. Chock full of information, and we are actually going to send, like I said, we'll send this recording out, but additionally, in about a week, we'll also be sending a checklist out as well. So I think that'll be great. As you're starting to go through this, use that checklist, and that'll be super helpful. So in the meantime, there's the link for the ebook. The other thing that I will also plug while we're I think getting a few more questions coming in. Not only just our global user group event, Connect IT, but more so the Boston Connect local. So for those of you that are in Boston, it is Tuesday, September 24th. I highly encourage you guys to come to that. We are offering a free Unitrends certification course to that, where we have our folks on site. They will walk you through the ins and outs, help you be more efficient at using the Unitrends software in conjunction with the appliance. It is a roughly, I'd say it's about 6 hours or so course. We'll obviously, we'll feed you. We'll even, once you get your certification, we will also, give you, we've got a happy hour afterwards so we can celebrate. But I would highly encourage, if you are in the Boston area, to sign up. And if it goes through, I dropped the link in the chat box, so feel free to register today. Let me take a look at some of the questions, John. That I think we got to a couple of them, but I believe there might have been one more that came in. The last question that just came in was, do you think there will be a quantity break pricing for Windows 10 upgrades licenses for PCs?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, but it is possible that you can negotiate something like that with your distributor reseller and or Microsoft to get more of a volume discount. But I don't have a definitive answer for that.
Fair enough. Yeah, I would say the same as well. Just if you are working with with a reseller, MSP, or work with them to hopefully get a break on some of that pricing. Cool. Next question that came in. How does Windows Express and Windows 10 work together? An example of folder shares.
Yeah, I'd have to kind of do some checking on that. I don't have an answer for that one either off the top of my head, but I could certainly, if we can get back to you with an answer to that question offline, and we'll make sure that we do that.
Okay. So yeah, that sounds good. I've got that jotted down here. We will reach back out. I'll get with some of our. I'm sorry. Windows XP. Sorry, Windows XP and Windows 10. So, John, so just for clarification, that was my fault.
Okay.
How does Windows XP and Windows 10 work together? An example is folder shares.
Yeah, well, again, if you're on XP, it's kind of a similar scenario to migrating off of Windows 7. It's it's an unsupported version of the OS. Maybe you're doing that because of some legacy issue, but it's probably something where, well, Windows XP has been out of support for a long time, so it's probably a situation where you do need to migrate to Windows 10, and yeah, there's probably, there could be compatibility issues there depending on the reason why you're still running XP at this point.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks all who submitted questions. John, thanks so much for hopping on today. I think the theme here, right, is the clock is very much running at this point towards that January date. If this wasn't on your radar, hopefully it is now, and you can start your planning. If it was, you're probably right at that good point to start planning and making the upgrades as needed. So again, if I can encourage you, if you're going to be in the Boston area or you are in the Boston area, please, register for the Connect Local, the user group event. We have a special Unitrends certification program. It's a day of training, free, so you can sign up. Dropped that link in. So if you do have a question about it, feel free to reach out to your account managers. They will have more information and can also help you get registered. So I think with that, we'll go ahead and close up. Thanks, John. Thanks for everybody for attending, and we will catch you next time.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.